I'm going to try to broaden the discussion a little bit about what we've just heard. John Krosnick gave us a sense that people strongly, there's a strong majority supporting climate action on climate change in this country. Yet I have a number of friends who believe climate change is happening, but they haven't reduced their emissions. We also know that there's, and we've talked about it today a little bit, that there's a lot of other problems that are happening around the world that are just as important and in fact interlinked with climate change, from ecological degradation, social injustice, economic inequity, etc. So I'm going to try to broaden the discussion and sort of provide a framework that I've been working on to sort of address this issue, a broader framework for thinking about it and responding to it. And then I'm going to try to provide you a framework with some fundamentals for thinking about how to motivate yourself and motivate other people to make the changes in thinking and behavior needed to move from what I call me to we. So I want to just start by asking you a few questions, and partly this is to allow you to stretch a little bit and also to sort of see where everybody's at in this. How many of you think, stand up if you agree with this, how many of you think you really understand what drives your own personal behavior? Why do you do, how many of you think you know why you do what you do? Stand up. You can kneel if you want. Okay, good, thank you. All right, so about half, all right. How many think you know how to change your personal behavior? How many of you have always been successful in reducing weight when you needed to, or stopping smoking, stopping drinking, you know, getting more exercise? How many of you know how to change your own behavior? All right, you're all hired. And how many of you really think you understand how to motivate other people to change their behavior? Okay, can you, please? All right, that's obviously not a surprise. If anybody did not get a chance to stand up very quickly, stretch, and then sit down, okay? Well, as I said, it's obvious that we have challenges ahead of us, right? If we can't figure out why we do what we do and how to motivate ourselves to change, how is it that we're going to motivate other people to address some of these critical issues? And I think that's a challenge that we all have to think about now. So I'm going to provide a framework for thinking about addressing this issue. And I think in today's overcrowded, overpolluted, overconsumed, and overheating world, helping people, helping ourselves, and motivating others to change their thinking and behavior is probably the most important thing we can do. I agree with Paul Hawken this morning that innovation in a way we've never imagined before is going to be critical. And that means we need to really stimulate and facilitate the process of helping people think differently. One of the reasons I think we are doing so much harm in the world today is because we lack a set of first-order principles, if you will, to guide socially and ecologically sound thinking and behavior. People need a set of simple priorities or simple principles they can follow. For many, many years, I did a lot of work in organizations, organizational change work. I wrote some books about it, and worked at the social level, as Kara talked about, and public policy level. And what I continued to hear was, give me some simple principles to follow. How do I make sense of all this complexity and chaos? So I'm going to start my presentation this afternoon by offering 5 interrelated commitments, which are each based on what I call a natural law of sustainability, that I think can help you and the people you work with. I hope that can help you and the people you work with grasp the thinking and behavior needed to make the shift from what I call me to we. These 5 commitments are based on many spiritual traditions, including Buddhism, in particular, as well as principles of psychology and social psychology. And indeed, they're my attempt to merge long-known spiritual traditions with my professional training. I'm actually trained as a counseling psychologist and in environmental science, so I've been trying to combine those most of my career. And these commitments, I hope, or I'm suggesting, can help us shift from what is, I think, a state of extreme individualism, as I call it, which is an almost exclusive focus on me. We focus in this country and in the West in general on what we want now, immediately, and we have a very small or limited focus on how that behavior affects the broader communities that we interact with and the environment. So we need to focus broaden our focus to a broader we, which I define as other people here and abroad and the ecological systems that support them. So at its core, to me, I think the shift that we need to think about, or one simple way to think about it, is a shift from me to we to really address many of these issues. Dan Siegel used that term the last couple of years. I really like that term. And then after I provide this framework for you, I'm going to spend most of the time talking about a framework again for making the change. So everybody just relax for a second and take a great deep breath. Everybody just take a deep breath. Who can tell me what just happened? What did you just do? You took a breath? What happened? You inhaled oxygen, right? Okay. The vast majority of the energy in your body is not produced directly from the food you eat or the water you drink. It is the result of the oxygen that you inhale that interacts and produces that. Oxygen detoxifies your blood, it strengthens your immune system, and it rebuilds your body. How many of you know where that oxygen came from? Where'd it come from? Anybody? Plants, some of it. Okay. About 3/4 of it was produced in marine environments through photosynthesis with single-celled green algae and bacteria, and the rest of it came through vegetation, the forest, etc., all around you. So complex interactions occurring in the oceans and in the landscapes all around you produce the oxygen that make your life possible. And how conscious are you of that? When you take a breath in all the time, you say, well, geez, I just breathed in something that the oceans produce for me. We don't usually do that, obviously, but that's reality. So here's a fundamental truth. Nothing exists on its own in this world. Everything is created by and sustained by something else. This is the law, the natural law of interdependency. The boundaries we create to distinguish ourselves from other people, humans from the so-called natural environment, our organization from other organizations, the economy from social systems, those aren't real. Those are illusions. And those are helpful illusions, but they're concepts we create in our mind simply as a way to divide the world into smaller pieces in order to understand it better and hopefully control it better. But we have to understand that those are just concepts. Those are illusions. There really is no difference between most of the processes going on. And if you're not constantly aware of the interconnections, the complex web of social and ecological systems that created you and that sustain you, you're likely to do more harm than good. So the first commitment, and the most important commitment involved with the shift from me to we, is to always strive to see the systems you are part of. The ecological and social systems. And this means we've got to help people understand their context. You can't quantify systems very well, but you can help people envision them. We do this all the time in the programs going on in my organization. Just draw systems maps for people. Here I am. Who am I connected to? Where am I getting my food from? Where am I getting my water from? and what happens with my waste and activities, help people understand their context. And this can be a very, very powerful process alone, and it's also fun and exciting. And you can do it with all sorts of different kinds of groups. Kids love doing it, drawing systems now. But unfortunately, as we just found, even us here, most people in the West and most people in general don't think this way. It's always been hard for humans to see the larger context in which they exist, partly because of our early evolution. When we were just emerging, we were on our own, trying to protect ourselves against saber-toothed tigers and all sorts of other things. And so our primary focus, sort of built into our DNA in some ways, is a focus on ourselves. And this was made even more difficult to do, thinking beyond ourselves, some 350 years ago, when philosophers like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and then Adam Smith came along and promoted the idea that each of us exists as a freestanding, independent entity. But remember, what they were responding to at that point was extensive feudalism, heavy control of the church, and feudal lords where most people lived in poverty. And so that was their reaction to that, to say, no, we are independent, we can think on our own. But that idea has now been constantly reinforced by economic theorists, political theorists, and others. And so we indeed live today in a culture of what I call extreme individualism. And that leaves most of us, you included, me included, pretty unconcerned about or unaware of the consequences of our activities on other people or other systems. And after all, if everyone is just responsible for themselves, we don't really have to be concerned about what we do. In fact, we're told, just do what you want to do, and pursue your own self-interest, and everything is going to work out for the best. And from climate change to the economic collapse of 2008, on and on, we can see that that idea hasn't worked out too well. So that leads to the second commitment involved with the shift from me to we. And it's one that most spiritual traditions and most psychologists will all tell you is critical to improve emotional and psychological health. Understand cause and effect. Pay attention to the consequences of your actions on the systems you're part of. And again, you can't necessarily quantify cause and effect real well, but you can help people envision it. You can map it. You can draw lines. If you haven't used a fishbone diagram, it's an easy way to do it. You can actually help people see and begin to think in those ways. Now I want you to imagine something different. I want you to imagine that a genie comes along and sweeps you up out of this room and makes you the most powerful decision maker on earth. Just like that. You're no longer, you're not here, you're not working in your own organization. You're now the most powerful decision maker on earth. And at your fingertips is all the information you need to make decisions that can affect anyone, any place on earth. But there's a catch. This genie has also given you a form of amnesia. You can't remember what your name is, who your family is, where you live, what your income is, what your nationality is, your ethnicity, your nationality. You can't remember anything about you. But you're the most powerful decision maker on earth. How would you make decisions under that condition? Anybody got a suggestion? You have the power to affect anything, but you don't know who you are. How would you make a decision? Anybody want to take a guess? Call your politicians? All right, good. What's that?
Like a politician.
Like a politician?
Because they don't really believe in anything.
I see, right. That's one way. Anybody else got an idea?
For the greatest good, because there is no mind people.
Exactly, yeah. I think you'd likely adopt a decision-making model, something like the old golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you, because you might be those others. You don't know how you're going to be affected. And as far-fetched as that scenario sounds, you're never going to be, if you are, let me know ahead of time, please, the most powerful decision maker on earth. But what I described today is really reality. That is to say, an action or decision by almost anyone on Earth today, given the overcrowded, overpolluted, overconnected nature of the world, can come back and affect anyone else at any time in a way we can't even predict. And so we have to think about how we're going to live in a world like that. And it requires the adoption of some very clear moral principles to guide our behavior. We get very confused about morality. We think morality is about sin or virtue, but it's not. Morality is about acting properly. Morality is about the duties and obligations we have to other people. That's really what morality is about. But our culture of extreme individualism prevents us from seeing that we have, or denying that we have obligations to other people. Our most universal moral obligation, one that is held by almost every religion around the world and is deeply embedded in our own laws here in this country, is to do no harm. Anything that causes unjustifiable suffering or death is morally wrong, and in fact, it's illegal, right? As I said, in today's overconnected world, almost everything we do now has the potential to have moral implications of doing harm. So that's the third commitment that's required for the shift from me to we. We need to adopt some clear moral principles based on those universal principles to guide our response to the consequences we see on the systems we're part of. And that's going to become increasingly more important. What principles are we going to use to guide our behavior in the future as climate change unfolds, as we get close to 2 degrees Celsius, as these things play out? I want you to shift gears now once again, and I want you to imagine the picture of the blue marble, the picture of the Earth that was taken in 1972 by the astronauts, by Apollo 17 astronauts, of the Earth sort of sitting out there in space all alone. The astronauts called it the little blue marble because it just looked like this blue marble out there in the middle of nowhere. And we can all see, obviously, when you imagine that there's no intake pipes allowing us to bring in more resources when we run out of resources or we contaminate the resources we have. And there's no discharge pipes that allow us to get rid of our waste and toxic material, et cetera. Everything we do or make stays with us here in some form, in some way. And there's a lot of discussion going on in the scientific community now. I've been part of it a little bit. It's been interesting about whether or not humanity has entered a new geological era called the Anthropocene. This is the era in which human impacts on the Earth, not natural processes, will determine the fate of the Earth. That we are now going to determine that. And it's a universal moral principle that the more control you have over another, the more you must use that power benevolently. So if our activities now determine the fate of the Earth, we must realize that we are now trustees of all that there is. And we have a responsibility to ensure the continuation of all life. And that's the fourth commitment involved with the shift from me to we. Acknowledge our trustee responsibilities and take responsibility for all life. Our culture of extreme individualism, as I was mentioning before, came about as a result of specific choices made by our predecessors in response to conditions they faced 350 years ago. But those conditions have fundamentally changed, right? They didn't deal with this size of a population. Trade in those days was mostly done within a community. Resources weren't depleted. They weren't dealing with something like climate change, et cetera. And so the conditions are different today, and we must make fundamentally different choices. And it's interesting to note that throughout history, humanity has made lots of fundamental changes in thinking and behavior. We forget that. We're in the middle of this battle with climate skeptics and others, and we think, how do we get people to change? Humans are really good at changing. None of you would be here unless your predecessors were really good at changing. And we cannot forget that. And we once believed that the sun revolved around the Earth. that burning people at the stakes kept the evil spirits away. It wasn't too long ago we believed that slavery was an economic necessity. Not everybody's changed that view, but most people around the world have. We've changed often, and every time we changed our beliefs, our actions changed. When our actions changed, the results changed. Human behaviors are based on beliefs, and if we change our beliefs, we can change our behavior. And this is the fifth and the final commitment involved with the shift from me to we. Choose your own destiny. That is to say, you don't have to be controlled by the social narratives that are pounded on us all the time in our society. We can choose a different path. I'd like you to spend a few minutes now thinking for yourself, how often do you follow each of those commitments? How often do you strive to see the systems you're part of? How often do you try to account for the consequences of your actions on those systems? Do you have a clear set of moral principles that guide your behavior? Do you always consider life elsewhere? And are you trying to make your own decisions? Are you controlled by people around you, the organizations you work in? Take a moment to just sort of think about that, and then if you will, turn to somebody next to you and just share what you found, okay? We're just going to take a minute to do this. Just talk to somebody about your sense of where you are with the 5 commitments involved with from me to we. I would suggest you continue that conversation over dinner or elsewhere. I've done this now probably, I guess this is my 35th time when we've done this with different kinds of groups, kids and adults, and the Urban Sustainability Leaders Association and many others. It's a very interesting process if you really dig down in it. I want to now move a little bit and talk about how we help people. You can help yourself begin to follow the 5 commitments that I've laid out, and how you can motivate others to do the same. And I want to talk about one way to think about this is to think about change as a pyramid of change. At the top of the pyramid are the results we're trying to achieve. You know, the emissions we're trying to reduce, the profits we're trying to produce in our organization, the happiness and well-being we're trying to promote. But remember that below those results are actions, right? Some policy we have, some technologies we have, some practices or behaviors produce those results. And I think we heard earlier, most of the time what we focus on in our world, especially the climate world, the environmental world, are the top 2. The funders drive us there. They want new policies really quickly so we can get emission reductions, et cetera. But we have to remember that below the actions are a set of beliefs that lead us to act in that way, to create the technologies in the way we create them, to develop the policies, to behave in certain ways. There are actually, one way to think about beliefs is there's 3 types of belief. Category 1 beliefs are based on information. We don't hold those beliefs very deeply. So that's why when somebody gets real-time data on their energy use on their wall, they can often turn down their thermometer because it's a belief that can change very easily. It's just based on information. But below that is a category 2 belief, which is based on recent experience. So if you see your CEO in your organization flying around in a jet or the purchasing policy in your organization being just the lowest cost product, you obviously those experiences indicate to you nobody's serious here about climate change. And then category 3 beliefs are based on early childhood experiences, and those are our core beliefs. And those experiences and those core beliefs are very, very difficult to change. But fundamental change starts and is essential that you get at the bottom side of the pyramid. If you stay at the top end, and I think that's what we often do when it comes to climate change, even when we're trying to motivate people to change behaviors in buildings, et cetera, and we don't get to beliefs and experiences, we're not going to get very far. Mostly what we'll get is the low-hanging fruit, and then we won't get very far. So let me give you a little bit a look at our core of who we are and how humans operate. At our core, we each have a set of core beliefs. These are the concepts we live by, and they're determined mostly in early childhood. many of which we don't even remember, some of which might even happen in the womb. One thing to remember is those core beliefs are always incomplete. We never see the world completely. In Buddhism, we call it neurosis, if you will, that in fact what's really happening is everyone is neurotic because we're not really seeing reality. We're only seeing the world through the core beliefs we hold. And so what we really have out there in the world is neurotic people fighting with neurotic people, none of which is really dealing with reality. And it's important to remember that our core beliefs are always incomplete. They are maintained by two processes. In psychology, we call it confirmation bias. We always look for information that supports our core beliefs, and we discount or ignore or attack any information that does not. I suggest that John Krosnick may want to look at confirmation bias as a process in terms of why congressmen get all this information but don't act on it. It doesn't conform to their core belief. And also mental grooving. And what this means is when people are stressed, when you're stressed, you're going to try to look back for some pattern that you've used in the past to fall back on, to respond to this stressful situation, and our core beliefs shape what those are. And of course, our core beliefs affect everything. They affect our relationships, they affect our work, our leisure, our personal health. Our world is driven by our core beliefs. And those core beliefs lead to a set of rules we adopt for ourselves, or assumptions about how we behave. So if my core belief is, I'm not lovable, my rule might be, never let anybody get close to me because they'll find out that I'm not a good person. Or if your core belief is, the world is a really cruel place, your rule will be, never trust anybody because you're going to get burned, right? And those rules lead to what we call automatic thoughts. That inside the human mind all the time, there's an internal dialogue going on. In Buddhism, we call it monkey mind. We're always trying to project the results of our behavior, how somebody's going to respond to us. We're planning what to do next week, all sorts of things. What we pay attention to, the thoughts that we get most hooked on, are the ones that are driven by the rules we've adopted that are based on those core beliefs. And of course, our automatic thoughts consequently lead to habitual responses. We pretty much respond to the same thing all the time. So if you're going to help people make the shift from me to we, you've got to address all these issues. Very tough to deal with core beliefs, but you can address and intervene at the rule level and the automatic thought level, and we'll talk about that. So here are some fundamentals. Karen said it earlier, the motivation people have is critical as to whether or not they're going to make a change. People must be ready, willing, and able to change. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And the second fundamental is that all change happens, all fundamental change happens through a series of fairly predictable stages. And you really have to think about that. And consequently, you need to use proper change mechanisms and the right kind of communications with the right kind of communicator for people in different stages of change, including yourself. So to be ready for change, it requires dissonance, okay? That's our buzzword. I like to use the word tension also. That means that there has to be a gap or dissonance between something you desire and where you currently are. It's a desired goal or a value which can be negative or positive. You really want to not get harmed by climate change, or you want to, more importantly, live up to your core values. You want to live your values. And self-regulation theory explains this. What this means is humans operate with a thermostat in us, much like a thermostat. When our thinking, behavior, and conditions around us are within a normal range of variability, no change is required. We're not going to do anything. It's when the value gets outside of that range, we want to make things right. We want to bring it back in that normal range of variability. Then we're willing to make a change. So in my world, the buzzword is no tension, no change. If you think we're going to shift people into climate-friendly behavior to a low-carbon economy simply by promoting, economic well-being, et cetera, that ain't going to happen. There's going to have to be some tension, some dissonance there. And so in the early stages of change, especially if you're a change agent, you've got to build or magnify dissonance about some unmet goal or value. Now, not achieving economic opportunity can be that, but it's usually a pretty weak one. And the key question then is not, is this person not motivated? I hear that all the time. Why can't we motivate people? We're all motivated for something. The question is, what is the person motivated for, and how do you build dissonance around that? Okay? Willingness requires self-efficacy. To be willing to change, people must have confidence that they can do what is necessary to reduce the dissonance. And eliminate the dissonance. So our perception of our ability to succeed influences the outcomes. And that perception has to do with whether our social networks will support, well, my family, my loved ones, my workers, et cetera, will support, my church members will support my change, whether it's too difficult or not for me, whether I have the skills, et cetera. All that's part of this assessment of self-efficacy. So your job as a change agent is to build self-confidence in people's capacities to use new behaviors, new practices, et cetera, and that those will solve the problem, including the benefit of the new policies. And finally, the third key, to be able, requires a significant sense of the benefits to change. People can be ready and willing to change, but still not able because the downsides of the change seem too big. Yeah, I know there's a problem. I think I got the skills to fix it, but boy, if I do that, I'm not going to end up better off. I'm going to end up worse off. And generally, the research shows that to make a fundamental shift, people need to see at least 2 benefits for every 1 downside of change. And that's really important. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. It's 1 standard deviation. And when you think about it, it's pretty obvious. If the downsides and the upsides of change are about equal, you'd rather just dance with the devil you know than the devil you don't. If the downsides are more than the benefits, you're not going to do anything. It's got to be pretty significant. So there can be a lot of downsides, but there have to be roughly twice as many upsides. I think when you look at the Yale research and other research, that in the US, tension is moderate, or dissonance is moderate about climate change. The sense of efficacy, that we can solve the problem, is very low, and the sense of benefits is low. So when I look at that and I go, well, why aren't we not making progress? It seems pretty obvious to me. We've got a long way to go. People don't think we have the tools and capacity. They don't think the policies we've been asked to support will do it, and we're not sure of the benefits. All we hear, in fact, is, geez, we're going to all be, living back in the Stone Age. So I just want to close real quickly by providing a model for thinking about stages of change. All change starts in disinterest. That is, we're not sure we need to change. We never thought about it. And disinterest is not a bad thing. We think everybody that is disinterested is in denial. That's not the case. There's lots of reasons why people stay in disinterest. Sometimes they're disinterested because they don't think they have the capacity. Or they're just ignorant. My wife keeps telling me I'm a little bit disinterested in my intake of carbohydrates, especially bagels and spaghetti. So all change starts in disinterest. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't criticize people for that. But to move out of disinterest, we simply have to open ourselves slightly to the possibility of making a change. And when we do that, we move to deliberation. And what that means is we start considering whether or not to make a change. And in deliberation, we're weighing the pros and cons of making the change. Should I? Should I not? Is this good for me? Is it not good for me? Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's not conscious. It's emotional. But that's the process we're going through. And if we decide the pros outweigh the cons significantly, we move to what I call the design stage. Yes, I'm going to make a change. And what this means is we design a plan. I'm going to try to make this change now. And then when we design the plan and decide that it's going to work for us, we make a commitment, a public commitment to that. So let me give you an example. I have a friend who used to drive a Ford SUV pickup, a big, huge pickup with black soot coming out the back. And one of his kids came to him one day after being in school and said, "Dad, I think we should get rid of this vehicle. It looks like it's really polluting a lot." And his wife said, yeah, that's a good idea. It's too big for me. I can't drive it around town. I can't park it. So he was completely disinterested before. He said, well, geez, with all this feedback, maybe I should think about it. So he entered the deliberation stage. Then he's tried to weigh the pros and cons. He said, well, will my friends who all drive big pickups, will they ostracize me or not? He went and talked to them. Well, it turns out that actually they were also going to buy Toyota pickups. You know, they were going to do the same thing. He realized his family would like it better. He was going to save some money. He's putting out a lot of money, all this. So he weighed the pros and cons, decided that they were, the pros were higher, moved to the I will change, the design change, went out and got the prices for selling his vehicle and the prices he could get for the charge for buying a new one, and he made a plan to do it, and he finally turned to his wife and said, we're going to sell this big truck and we're going to buy a Toyota pickup. Is that okay with you? So he made it public. Organizations do this all the time. It's the exact same process organizations go to, but the design phase in organizations is often very long. And then you move to the doing phase, which is usually playing out the initial plan that you have, and in this process people are breaking habits and starting new ones. And if you like that process, you keep it up, you move to the defending stage where you try to stick with it over time. So here's just one thing to consider. In the early stages of change, people are not ready to change. And if you try to force them to move, change your light bulb, support our policy, whatever, you're going to push them backwards. And in the early stages of change, you need to use cognitive and experiential change mechanisms, which, and I'm not going to go through these, we can talk about them, but there's a whole range of them that move them through disinterest into deliberation and into design. But once people get to the design phase, then they are ready to change. Then you use behavioral change mechanisms. And it's very important to know the difference. That's reinforcement, et cetera. Helping relationships, supportive relationships are critical throughout. So in summary, it seems to me that climate change is just one of many signs of many issues we need to address that indicate that our way of seeing and responding to the world is no longer effective. I do think we need a set of simple first-order principles that people can adopt. I've offered one way to think about it. Let me know if you think it's effective or helpful. The shift from me to we with the 5 commitments. Our primary job as change agents is to create an attractive entrance for people that allow them to want to go through the natural change process themselves. If we think we're going to make change by telling people how bad they are and how much in denial they are, et cetera, we're not going to get very far. And we have to remember that we all suffer from incomplete concepts and beliefs. And if we think we're the virtuous ones and everyone else is not, we're not going to get very far. Thank you.